faces now. So if you have any questions, like I said, I'll save some time at the end. So I can't see any raised hands. Okay, so main statute in California that's relevant in this area, the Fair Employment and Housing Act, by far the most commonly sued under statute, very broad and very employee friendly. That law defines discrimination as to refuse to hire or employ a person, or to bar, discharge a person from employment, or to discriminate against a person in compensation or in terms, conditions, or privileges of employment based upon a protected category. A couple quick things I want to point out in this definition. I realize that the legislature used the word discriminate to define discrimination, not entirely helpful, but that phrase, terms, conditions, or privileges of employment, is really important. So discrimination isn't just about who gets hired and who doesn't, or who gets fired and who doesn't, who gets a promotion. It's really about any benefit connected with the employment, right? So even something like providing a workplace free of hostile discrimination. Every harassment claim is necessarily a discrimination claim because there's a difference in the terms, conditions, or privileges of employment based on that protected category that constitutes the hostile work environment. That last phrase, also very important in this definition, based on a protected category. Without that phrase, this definition would essentially just mean you can't treat employees differently at all. And that's not what the law intends or requires. It's perfectly fine to treat employees differently for legitimate reasons, right? You have a salesperson that sells more things than someone else, they get a bigger bonus. It's when those employment decisions are based on a protected category that they become unlawful. A plaintiff in a discrimination case who's alleging a discrimination claim, regardless of what type of protected category is at issue, got to prove a couple things. They have to prove they're a member of a protected category, or that the employer treated them as if they were a member of the protected category. They have to prove that they were subjected to an adverse employment action that has a legal definition, and it essentially can be anything. It's not a very limiting legal definition. They have to prove that their protected status was a motivating factor in the adverse action. Keep in mind that motivating factor here probably sounds colloquially a lot stronger than it is in practice. So motivating factor doesn't have to mean that it's substantial, just has to be a factor in the process. The plaintiff also has to prove that they suffered harm and that the employer's conduct was a substantial factor in causing the harm. So here you do have the substantiality requirement with respect to the harm. You don't have the substantiality requirement. We're talking about the motivating factor for the adverse action. And remember, protected category or protected status refers to things like gender, race, color, age, national origin, disability status, medical condition, can even refer to things like marital status. This is the legal definition of harassment. It's also from the Fair Employment and Housing Act. It's conduct or employment decisions based on a worker's protected category that unreasonably interfere with an employee's equal employment opportunities or create an intimidating, hostile, or offensive working environment. So again, you have the requirement that the conduct be based on a worker's protected category. I think a lot of times I will get calls from clients because they've received internal complaints where an employee just says, this person is harassing me, they won't leave me alone, I don't like the way they talk to me, they're rude. So they're using harass in kind of the colloquial sense, right? Lowercase h harassment, not capital H harassment. In order to be unlawful harassment, the conduct at issue, the comments at issue have to be based on a protected category, okay? Really important. One other thing I want to point out in this definition, it actually encompasses two types of harassment. The first is what we call quid pro quo or economic harassment. That's sort of the sexual propositioning, right? Conditioning employment benefits or employment consequences on the submission to or rejection of sexual conduct. That's not really relevant for the training that we're talking about here today. The second type of harassment that's included in this definition is hostile work environment harassment. By far the more common type of harassment claim that we see, probably double the amount of quid pro quo claims, if not more than that. A plaintiff alleging a hostile work environment claim got to prove four things: unwelcome or unwanted conduct that's based on a protected category, that is sufficiently severe or pervasive such that a reasonable person would find the workplace to be intimidating, hostile, or abusive. So again, the protected category requirement still applies. In these elements, one of the crucial things, that unwelcome or unwanted conduct element, really important to keep in mind that unwelcomeness is not the same as intentional, okay? A harasser's intent, entirely irrelevant to the issue of whether there's been a hostile work environment claim, okay? We're looking at the unwelcomeness from the perspective of the victim. What matters is what the victim has perceived. The other thing I want to talk about, that severe or pervasive requirement. You should think of severity and pervasiveness as sort of opposite ends of a scale, right? The more severe something is, the less pervasive it has to be unlawful. Something like sexual groping or outright use of slurs, that kind of thing, that probably doesn't have to happen that frequently. It doesn't have to be, repeated behavior. That's severe enough on its own that it doesn't have to be very pervasive. On the flip side, something like a belittling expression, those are words like honey, sweetie, dear, that kind of thing, not very severe on its own. Someone using those belittling expressions in the workplace got to be very pervasive to cross that line into unlawfulness. Last thing, that reasonable person requirement in that last bullet point there. Remember that reasonable person requirement is talking about a reasonable person standing in the shoes of the victim. So it's not just some hypothetical, omnipresent, all-knowing, reasonable being, right? It's, if the plaintiff in a harassment claim is a woman, we're asking, would a reasonable woman find the workplace to be intimidating, hostile, or abusive? If the plaintiff in the harassment action is someone who is disabled, we're asking, would a reasonable disabled person find the workplace to be intimidating, hostile, or abusive? So again, these elements are victim-centered, right? What the harasser intends, not really relevant here at all. So those are the legal frameworks that apply to this microaggression discussion that we're going to have. Very quickly, to define microaggressions, they're brief, they're commonplace, often unintentional, kind of verbal, behavioral actions that really are directed only at members of a marginalized group because of their identity associated with that marginalized group. So directed at people of color, directed at women, LGBTQ people, etc. Microaggressions are by definition micro, right? They're something small, and they may not seem that big of a deal in the moment. The point is, only members of that marginalized group ever experience these microaggressions. And so they accumulate, right? It's the accumulation of these small indignities that eventually act as a tax on that marginalized group, right? So it may be the case that you personally only engage in one microaggression per day, some stray comment that maybe you intend is unintentional, maybe you intend it as complimentary, but it's only directed at the single disabled person in the office. And what do you know? Everyone's single day microaggression always directed at this disabled person. That person is facing a tax that non-disabled people do not. Microaggressions, there's sort of three types in the literature. Micro assaults are the most egregious one. They are intentional, they're conscious, they're explicit. Think about wearing a KKK hood or outright refusing service to some group of people. The intent with a micro assault is to hurt, is to discriminate. Micro insults and micro invalidations are mostly unintentional. Sometimes they can even come out as complimentary things. Usually they're rooted in some kind of unconscious bias, right? So micro insults can convey insensitive comments, rude comments, or they can demean or dismiss someone's cultural identity. Micro invalidations, similarly, often unintentional. This occurs when you're excluding or nullifying someone's thoughts or feelings, right? Someone's pointed out to you that maybe you've said something that's a microaggression, and you're dismissing that. You're being too sensitive, you're overreacting. I would never have a problem with this. I'm going to ignore your feedback. That would be a micro invalidation. Let's look at some examples.
Ew, get off of me.
Sophie, go with the little girls' room for a minute, Kate.
So excited. Oh my God.
There's going to be some things that you're going to be able to get that other people in the office don't get. One of them, gym membership.
You want me to lose weight?
No, I don't want you to.
Catcalls, staring at a woman's breasts or legs. It's a microaggression because it fulfills the theme of what we call sexual objectification.
I love the fact that you're a grandma.
Oh, God!
You are! You're a hot grandma!
Oh, my God.
What are some other common gender-based microaggressions? Again, these are comments or conduct that are often directed at women in the workplace that men don't necessarily face. So a question, when are you thinking of starting a family? That's often a question that's directed at women, particularly in their 30s. No one really ever asks a man in the workplace, when are you thinking of starting a family? And I think most employers who say something like this, in their minds, they're trying to plan for maternity leave, for example. They're trying to plan for the woman's career advancement. Well, we should pause and reflect about why we don't consider men having the same amount of time off or men having a leave related to a new child, sort of the same kind of career obstacle or career gap that women face. Have you met Jennifer yet? She's a lovely girl. Again, something intended to be a compliment, but it's infantilizing, right? Especially referring to an adult woman. The easiest way I can illustrate how bad this is reverse the genders. Have you met Joe yet? He's a lovely boy. It sounds silly when you say it like that, right? Most women perceive lovely girl to be equally silly. Jennifer can be too assertive in meetings versus I like how Joe always speaks up and stands his ground in meetings. So here we're rewarding the male who conforms to gender-based expectations of behavior. We're punishing the woman who doesn't conform to gender-based expectations of behavior. Kind of a related one, that's not very ladylike. Again, not the type of feedback that we would give a man in the workplace. You'd never give a man feedback in the workplace by saying, you really shouldn't have done that. That wasn't very manly. That doesn't have a place in the workplace. Similarly, references to being ladylike should not either. Being referred to as one of the girls in HR, the girls in admin. Again, the word girl refers to young women, usually under the age of 18. No adult woman in the workplace wants to be referred to as one of the girls. Interrupting. Tons of workplace studies over multiple years have shown that women are interrupted in meetings something like 30 to 40% more frequently than men. Keep in mind that microaggressions are committed by everyone. So even women tend to interrupt other women more frequently than they do men. Assigning administrative duties. So you're in a meeting with a bunch of people, maybe there's only one or two women in the meeting. Do you assume that the woman's going to be the one who takes notes, that she's going to perform the secretarial function? And then lastly, mansplaining. This refers, well, let the next video illustrate.
There is a grotesque gender imbalance in the VC field right now. I can help you navigate the toxicity of this male culture which is encroaching on our feminist island. I mean, for instance, there is something called mansplaining. Have you heard about this?
We know what mansplaining is.
Mansplaining is when a man will condescendingly explain something to a woman that she already knows.
Mansplaining, one of my favorite clips there. Keep in mind too that for these gender-based microaggressions, there is an influence of intersectionality, right? So older women in particular may face a unique type of microaggression, or women of color may face a unique type of microaggression, especially Black and brown women, for example. There's sort of the stereotype of an angry Black woman or an angry Latina woman, right? It's the way that the gender and race intersect with each other that make up that stereotype. All right, we talked about microaggressions. those have to do with kind of individual contact, right? One-on-one interactions. Really important to remember that discrimination in the workplace is not just an individual or subjective issue. It's in fact systemic, right? These types of bias patterns repeat on a systemic basis. They're not dependent on any one person perpetuating them. So there's the prove it again bias. This refers to the tendency of women to have to provide more evidence of their competence in order to be seen as equally competent as their male peers. So for example, men tend to benefit from or men are given the benefit of the doubt more frequently than women in the workplace. This is also called the halo effect, right? A man makes a mistake on a project, you're willing to write it off to, oh, his workload is busy, he was doing this under the gun in a tight time frame. Women are not given usually those same kind of wiggle room, cushion, benefit of the doubt. It also refers to the tendency to refer to male accomplishments as something gained by skill, whereas female accomplishments, female advancement is gained by luck. She had a great opportunity, she lucked into it, versus he worked really hard and climbs the ladder, for example. There's also the tightrope bias. This reflects the fact that office politics, often more complicated for women than men, because women are walking this line between being seen as difficult if they're too assertive versus not go-getters if they're not assertive, right? So you're punished sort of no matter what you do. There's this constant tension between being competent and competitive versus being likable. We don't really consider likability when we think of male leaders. The best illustration of this is in politics. There was this amazing study done of Hillary Clinton's time as Secretary of State in the Obama administration. And surveys taken of Hillary's favorability ratings showed that anytime over Hillary's career, so back when she was in state politics, local politics, et cetera, anytime that she sought power, her favorability ratings went down. But when she eventually got into the office and was competent in her job, her favorability ratings went up. So it was really the seeking of power, the assertiveness, the confidence that she was displaying that the public was punishing her for. The tightrope bias also comes up when we're talking about how you assign and what type of work you assign to men and women. There's the assumption that women are going to perform sort of office housework, right? Lawyers, for example, on a litigation matter. The woman's going to be the one maintaining the calendar. She's going to be the one communicating with the client, communicating with the opposing attorney. The male attorney is going to be the one that gets to do oral argument at the big motion. The office housework versus the glamour work. The tug of war bias occurs when bias against a particular group fuels conflict within the group. So for example, something called a collective threat. It's the tendency, for instance, of people of color to say, well, if one of us fails, that reflects badly on the whole group. There's also the competitive threat that falls under this bias pattern. The competitive threat refers to kind of the opposite of that collective threat. If one of us succeeds, maybe there's only room for one of us to succeed. You're kind of creating natural points of competition, within the same group. Tokenism also falls under this tug of war bias, right? Companies who lift up one particular candidate, a woman, someone who's diverse, and say, well, we've done it, right? We've solved our issue with racism, with sexism by promoting this single person, and we're going to put the burden of proving the success of this particular marginalized group on this single person who we've promoted. Lastly, there's the maternal wall bias. This refers to kind of the notion that women should conform to the ideal of a mother who puts their children first, right? So this bias relates to kind of embedded social expectations triggered by motherhood. It refers to kind of the tendency of women to have to start over after they return from a maternity leave. They've got to prove all of their competence anew, even if they left to go out on maternity leave kind of at the top of the game. There's also an attribution bias that comes into this particular bias pattern. The woman is late because, of course, she's caring for her family versus instead of something like traffic. Also, this bias is really important to recognize that it negatively impacts fathers as well, right? The maternal wall bias pattern is what makes companies punish men who take the full amount of paternal leave, right? There's kind of this unspoken social expectation that maternity leave is really related to the pregnancy and not caring for this newborn that this couple has brought into the world. And so fathers don't need as much leave. Why are bias patterns important? Again, the perception of gender-based bias is an individual and subjective problem. So solely focusing on microaggressions and unconscious bias really does ignore the systemic and structural issues. It also means that if let's say you've got one single person who's really bad at microaggressions, kind of doesn't get when they're overstepping bounds. Think of Michael Scott from The Office, for example. You get rid of Michael Scott in The Office, that doesn't mean that you've gotten rid of gender or race-based bias in the workplace, right? It's the systemic and structural issues related to those biases that we're talking about here when we're talking about bias patterns. So let's talk about how some microaggressions show up in legal cases. And when I do my standard anti-harassment training for employers, I always like to say that really all employment cases these days are based on microaggressions. We don't really have kind of the horrific fact patterns that you may have seen in the 60s, the 70s, even the 80s. Instead, the harassment cases that we see, the discrimination cases that we see are much more subtle. They're based on the accumulation of these little comments, these little microaggressions. So 2 case examples I want to talk about with you today. One is this Velez v. Novartis Pharmaceutical Companies case, Pharmaceuticals Corporation. This was a 2010 case. This was actually brought against the Novartis office here in the Bay Area. This was the largest jury verdict in a gender discrimination case in the history of the country. So this case was brought by a class of female pharmaceutical representatives who alleged that they were paid less than their male counterparts, despite having similar training, similar experience, et cetera. And as evidence of the gender-based bias on the part of management in making compensation decisions, they presented a series of microaggressions. First time we actually see the word microaggressions used in the case law. One in particular that the case is famous for in my world: first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes flex time and the baby carriage. So in this case, there was evidence that a supervisor at Novartis repeatedly kind of sang this little sing-song line. That would played a big role in the jury trial. Basically, the plaintiffs painted through all these little comments a picture of a corporate culture that showed sexist attitudes on the part of management. And the jury basically found, look, if you've got all of these little comments that show sexism on the part of management, it's hard to see how those same managers could divorce that gender-based bias when they're making compensation decisions, right? So the plaintiffs are using the statistical evidence that's really more black and white, right? Same years out of college, same years of experience. Female pharmaceutical rep makes this, male pharmaceutical rep makes that. That's easy to show a disparity. You need plaintiffs really rely on these extra evidence of small indicators of bias to prove that the disparity isn't just something that exists for some other non-discriminatory reason, but really that it exists specifically because of differential treatment of protected categories. Other very famous case that I want to touch on, and I'm touching on it for a slightly different reason. This was a case from the 80s that went all the way to the Supreme Court, involved a female accountant who was nominated for partnership at Price Waterhouse. Her partnership promotion was postponed for multiple years in a row. She was given various feedback at different times for why her promotion was being postponed, including that she wasn't walking or talking femininely enough, that she needed to wear makeup and wear jewelry and dress herself up. Her male coworkers also said, and this sort of led to her promotion postponement as well, that she used bad words, that she was demanding, that she wasn't very ladylike in her management of other people or in her interactions with clients. Ms. Hopkins eventually introduced evidence that male coworkers were even more foul-mouthed with clients. This was the heyday of the 80s and the taking clients to the strip club after some big meeting, right? So certainly negative feedback to her for being aggressive, for not being ladylike, was not the same as the feedback that men received. This case is really important because it goes back to that point of, like I said, in the list of microaggressions, rewarding women for conforming to gender-based stereotypes, punishing them for not conforming to gender-based stereotypes. So two really famous cases based on microaggressions. Of course, Pricewaterhouse v. Hopkins, the word microaggressions wasn't used, it wasn't created, but really is one of the first big cases where we see the accumulation of small indignities is what the plaintiff used to prove bias. Why is learning about microaggressions important? Why is it important that we root this out of the workplace? Microaggressions aren't really about being PC. It's not about kind of creating this civility code in the workplace. Microaggressions have a real effect on people, right? Tons of research shows that microaggressions, especially repeated and sustained ones, can cause feelings of depression, feelings of anxiety. They can cause people to seek unhealthy coping mechanisms such as drinking or use of drugs. And obviously we know all of these effects from decades of workplace research have a hugely negative effect on workplace morale, on employee productivity, as well as employee turnover. How do victims respond to microaggressions in the moment? There's a couple stages that occur. First, there's the questioning stage. The person is asking themselves, did that really happen? Did I hear that person correctly? Am I being too sensitive? The point of outlining this victim response is to show really that victims aren't just harmed by the underlying microaggression, the underlying offensiveness of the comment or the conduct. They're also harmed by the additional stress that comes about with how do I respond to this particular moment. After the victim is questioning, they have to decide whether to respond at all. If they respond, is this going to lead to an argument? Is this going to affect my relationship with this person? Again, the burden is on the victim of the offense to also be the one to have to think about the relationship. If I don't respond, am I going to regret it? Does it convey that I accept the behavior or the statement? Or it's not up here, but I think a lot of victims of microaggression also feel like, am I letting down my fellow women? Am I letting down my fellow people of color by not saying something and allowing this behavior to continue, potentially exposing someone else to the same behavior? Lastly, after they've decided whether to respond, victims have to decide how to respond. What's going to be effective? What am I going to be able to control my feelings around? There's passive responses, right? Comments or conduct that's a little bit more subtle, something like rolling your eyes, heavily sighing as a way to communicate unhappiness or annoyance, or even potentially talking about the microaggression incident to someone else in the hopes that the comments eventually get back to the perpetrator. It's a more subtle way of responding. Of course, there's an active way to respond as well, directly pointing out to the offender why something is offensive or even attempting to educate them. How do we resolve microaggressive incidents in the workplace? I don't think we're ever going to be able to root them out 100%. Until the day that we can root out unconscious bias 100%, we're not going to be able to root out microaggressions 100%. First thing I want to mention again, everyone commits microaggressions. People of color commit microaggressions against other people of color. LGBTQ people commit microaggressions against other LGBTQ people. So it's not just about the majority group offending the minority group. It's really everyone offending the minority group. If someone points out to you that you've transgressed one of these lines, that you've committed a microaggression, you should acknowledge their negative feelings, own the comment that you made, and drop that kind of tendency to be defensive or dismissive of their feelings. Remember, we saw in the legal framework, the harasser's intent does not matter when we're talking about unwelcome conduct. Unwelcome conduct determined by what the victim perceives. When we're talking about if a reasonable person would find the conduct to be harassing or offensive, we're looking at a reasonable person in the shoes of the victim. Harasser's intent does not matter. You should also listen. You should be open to education and seek out resources on your own. Again, unconscious bias is something that affects everybody. We all have blind spots for various protected categories. No one is free from it, So you should be open to being educated about your own blind spots. And as Claire mentioned, this is kind of a really popular topic in the culture these days. Tons of resources available, podcasts, videos, other media, articles about this very topic. So it does help if you do that own self-education. You shouldn't be relying on the emotional labor of the person you've just offended to also educate you on why what you said was offensive. You should also engage in some self-reflection and do your own regular gut check. When you find yourself interrupting someone in a meeting, for example, just pause. Did I just interrupt a man or a woman? Next time you do it, notice the same. Check if there's any patterns that you are unwittingly engaging in. And then lastly, don't repeat the same mistake twice. I think a lot of people who are victims of microaggression, women in particular, people of color in particular, they're almost used to it. That's kind of sad to say, right? But most folks are. They're used to these microaggressions because, again, they're small indignities that this group is subjected to over time consistently. But when someone points out to you that you've engaged in some microaggression and they've explained to you why it's offensive, they explained to you why it was inappropriate, and then you repeat it, well, the first time might be a mistake. The second time is perceived as a conscious decision, right? We've escalated potentially from that micro insult that's unintentional, potentially complimentary, to that micro assault, something that is intentional. And I will say from a litigation perspective, it's when the same mistake is repeated that we have disputes that eventually snowball into litigation. There really isn't litigation based on the first microaggression. It's always based on the 30th or something like that. Now, again, as I said, resolving microaggressive incidents, addressing unconscious bias in the workplace, there is an individual level to solving this problem. It's why allies are important, right? It's exhausting to be both the victim and the educator in response to microaggression. So there is an individual component that's very important, but there's also a structural and organizational component. So how should the employer as a whole respond to microaggressive incidents? You want to foster inclusive and supportive environments. This can be done in a number of ways. It includes purposely hiring diverse employees and making sure that they're equitably integrated into the workplace. It includes soliciting regular feedback from employees. So consider, for example, implementing 360-degree reviews for people in positions of authority. If you're not regularly soliciting feedback from employees, whether it's through a formal mechanism like a 360 review or informally through kind of back channeling informal conversations, you're never really going to get at problematic people in positions of authority. You're not going to foster an inclusive, supportive environment if you're not regularly soliciting feedback from employees about the people managing them. You should create or update your discrimination or harassment policies. Hopefully no employers in 2021 are just barely now creating a discrimination and harassment policy. But I will say, as someone who advises clients on employee handbooks, for instance, as well as employee policies like this, a lot of policies haven't been updated in decades. There's sort of the standard policy that everyone puts in a handbook, which is fine. It's probably necessary. Is it sufficient to address the way modern discrimination happens in the workplace? Probably not. So you may want to take a look at your discrimination and harassment policies to make sure that they're really geared towards how these issues come up in the modern workplace. You want to collaborate with groups and organizations who are committed to addressing issues of diversity and inclusion, as well as equity, right? If you are picking a vendor, for example, you want to make sure that that vendor has an eye towards these issues. This all goes to fostering inclusive and supportive environments for all employees. You want to pick a trainer. If you've got a trainer that's addressing how to deal with workplace conflict, for example, you want to make sure that you're picking a trainer or an organization to conduct that training that's committed to acknowledging these issues influence something like workplace conflict. You also want to offer trainings and opportunities for continuing education and diversity workshops. I think what I've seen since last year is an increase in the number of employers that do not just the standard supervisor anti-harassment training, but they also do separate trainings depending on the particular employee group. So for example, trainings on unconscious bias specifically for anyone in a hiring position. That's a really common thing that I'm seeing lately. I've also been asked to do more in-depth training on microaggressions specifically and how they play out, like I said, in actual litigation matters. Lastly, to the extent that there are really deep-rooted issues in your workplace, you might want to consider hiring a workplace mediator. And these types of workplace mediators have become incredibly common, I would say, in the past 5 years or so. It's sort of seen as a way for employers to hopefully let the employee be heard and address some of the underlying issues. I will say it really is a risk management tool more than anything. I think that often these workplace mediators, especially skilled ones, can get at the root of a problem. They can set up mechanisms for how two people should communicate in an effective way, and they identify patterns or triggers that cause a downward spiral. Some of them are really brilliant. So if you've got deep-rooted issues between two people, for example, this may be a good solution. When I said that it's more risk management than anything, is because a lot of times when I see a litigation matter lay on my desk, really I'm able to dig in and assess it's because the employee never felt heard. They never felt like the complaints that they brought forward were addressed. There was a problem of repeating the same mistake over and over again, right? These workplace mediators hopefully help to get at that issue before that pattern snowballs and we get a litigation matter. So I've talked pretty consistently now for just about 30-ish minutes, 35 maybe. I will leave some time for questions here at the end.
Wow, thank you, Ms. Martinez. That was quite a lot to take in. Thank you so much. Are there any questions for Ms. Martinez? Very brief.
I do.
Okay, just one moment, Dr. Stanley. Yes, so thank you. Excellent presentation. Dr. Stanley, just one moment. Vice President Zepeda is going to resume his role as our parliamentarian. We are going to, because I promised Ms. Martinez that we would not keep her long. Let's see, it is 7:48. Let's just schedule about 15 minutes. Is that okay, Ms. Martinez? Okay, great. Let's just schedule about 15 minutes or so for the board and to talk with Ms. Martinez before we can let her go. So that if we need to bring her back another time, she'll be willing to come back to see us.
Of course.
Okay, so Director Stanley and Vice President Zepeda, I'm going to let you facilitate the The hands, can you see? I know he's not feeling well, everyone, so let's just give him mercy. Let's give him some mercy. He doesn't have to speak too well. Okay. Director Stanley?
My question is, can you make available the slides you showed during your presentation?
Absolutely. I will, Claire has a copy and she can get them distributed.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Director Stanley. Are there any other further questions?
Yeah, Director Wiener.
I have Director Alvarado. Thank you. Director Alvarado?
Oh, no, I'm good. Thank you. No questions for me.
Okay, thank you. Director Wiener. Director Zabela, you got the time. Go ahead, Director Wiener.
Yeah, do you, in terms of microaggressions, would you say that from the standpoint of the aggrieved, that it's a subjective, not objective kind of situation, that there can be a person who feels that they've been microaggressed against, and the fact there's no objective way to determine that that's true, that they've been microaggressed, that it's more that they feel microaggressed rather than a perpetrator did something that's defined objectively as microaggression. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. So the specific examples that I included in my slides are examples that have come up consistently in cases, right? So for those specific examples, I would probably say that they're more objective in the sense that they've been tried, right? A court has ruled on them, a jury has ruled on them. The way I want to answer your question is actually in reference to that reasonable person standard that we saw with the elements for a hostile work environment claim. So that reasonable person standard comes up a lot in the law in various different areas. There are subjective and objective components to that standard, right? So I think what you're getting at is something that defense litigators call an eggshell plaintiff, right? Someone who thinks everything is offensive or thinks everything is hostile. So the reasonable person standard, the subjective component asks, was the victim truly offended? Were they truly aggrieved, right? And this is where the victim's own behavior can become relevant. If I, for instance, and excuse my language, refer to all of my female coworkers as girl or bitch or something like that, very difficult for me to prove that I found that subjectively offensive when it's directed at me. That's the subjective component of the reasonable person standard. The objective component of the reasonable person standard is really the backstop against what you're referring to, Director Wiener, as the eggshell plaintiff, right? So we're not asking, was the victim individually, herself, was she offended? We're asking whether some hypothetical woman who is reasonable, would that person be offended? Now, a lot of times when I explain that reasonable person standard in these trainings, I'll inevitably get a question. I don't understand, Jennifer, who is the person, right? Just tell me who the person is. The person is the jury, right? So it's kind of a community-based standard. And anytime I'm talking to people about what a jury might say, I always tell them best place to see what a jury might say is in the grocery store. Best cross-section of a potential jury pool. Next time you're in line to check out, and of course, we've got still the long COVID lines at the store, the 6 people in front of you, the 5 people behind you, that's your 12-person jury. That's who's deciding what the reasonable person would think. So, a 12-person jury in the Bay Area, for example, in California, known kind of liberal area, probably going to find different what a reasonable person would believe than a 12-person jury in the panhandle of Florida, right? So there's a community-based standard. So in the moment, are you going to be able to resolve that issue of this person is too sensitive? Maybe not. When it comes to litigation, that's how we resolve it. We on the defense side will say, this person is not being reasonable. No reasonable person, no reasonable woman would find this thing to be aggressive. Now, as a practical matter, remember, because I'm the litigator, I've got my litigator hat on. It's costly to try to fight something in the moment. And a lot of times people react, victims of microaggression, what really is offensive to them is someone telling them, you're overreacting, you're mistaken, it's your fault for interpreting it this way, no one meant it like that. I don't think that people in marginalized groups seek out these opportunities to be offended, especially in the workplace. If someone is bothered to struggle with kind of the steps that we saw that victims of microaggression are facing, if they're struggling with those steps, it's not something that they want to just do for the hell of it, right? Usually it's because they've had really considered debates internally about, should I say something about this? Are there going to be negative consequences to me speaking up? So I don't think that in the workplace, when someone files, for instance, an internal HR complaint on these issues, for the most part, I see them done in good faith. There are the occasional ones that maybe are bad faith. The token kind of employee's got performance issues, sees the writing on the wall, and turns some small incident into some big thing to kind of insulate them from disciplinary action. I get those every once in a while. But I don't think for the most part, when someone has taken the initiative to speak up, it's because they truly were being irrational. Again, because of all those kind of obstacles to speaking up. I'm not sure if I answered your question entirely.
Well, actually, you have and you haven't, because what I'm seeking is training so that I avoid unknowingly commit an aggressive, what do you call it, microaggressive act.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking for something more solid to hang my hat on than you hurt this other person's feelings. I don't intend to hurt anybody's feelings. And I feel like I've been in the vanguard of social change my whole life and have, listened to and studied these issues that you are before they became legal issues, but when they were discussed in feminist articles or, articles on racism, etc. And so I feel like I'm the reason for this meeting tonight, because I was approached with a conundrum, and I just seriously could not understand what the person was getting at. I seriously could not understand why what I said was offensive. And so that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for some substantial way to say objectively, oh, don't say it like this. Don't say that. Don't say this. But in this case, I couldn't even, it was like, no, there's no way I could even imagine that would be an issue.
Yeah, and I don't know that there's ever going to be a framework that says black and white, no pun intended, this thing is okay to say and this thing is not okay to say. I think there is a definitive universe of things we know for sure are not okay to say. Are you starting a family? Jennifer's a lovely girl, all of those things that I mentioned. But that's the floor, not the ceiling, right? The best way that I can recommend is, if someone's pointed out that you've done something or you've said something that crosses that line, pause and ask yourself, would I have asked this question to someone in the majority group, right? So another frequent one that I see that I think some people really struggle with is often a compliment paid to people of color. You speak so well, right? And again, most people who say it think that they're giving a compliment. Someone just spoke excellently. I'm so impressed. For whatever reason, it's not a compliment that's really ever directed at white employees. No white employee is like, wow, you really speak so well. So you're about to give this compliment to this person, or maybe you did, and they said, hey, that's offensive. This is what I mean by your own self-reflection or your own gut check. Would I have made this comment? Would I have asked this question to someone of the majority group?
Yeah,
Yes.
so,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, Director Wiener. Directors, Vice President Isabella, did you have something?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't stop time because I figured we had 15 minutes and I don't think that anybody else had questions. I think it's a really, Director Alvarado has a question. I see his hand.
Go ahead.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
Okay, so rather than saying you speak well, a better appropriate comment would be great speech, correct?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And really the offensiveness with that statement is sort of, you were surprised that I spoke well, right?
Right.
Lawyer, I've got more than a decade or almost a decade and a half of experience. There really should be no expectation that I'm not speaking well at something.
Right, right.
So yes, exactly. Great speech, great presentation, get specific. I love the way that you addressed this particular topic, something like that.
Yeah, no, I could see where, you speak well would be offensive.
Or similar kind of an easier to see analogy, your English is so good, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Often
Yes.
said to especially Latinos,
Yes,
especially
that's a
to
great
Asian
way.
Americans, right? Or another one that I often see is the follow-up question. Jennifer, where are you from? I'm from Oakland. No, where are you
Yes.
really from?
Really from?
Right. Really.
No, where are
from.
you?
No, where are you originally from,
Where are you
right?
Right,
really
exactly,
from?
exactly. And as someone who is a
Been
multi-generational
there, done that,
Oaklander
yes.
and very proud of it, I am.
Uh-huh.
No.
Yeah, no. I think
Thank
that
you.
the other one, go ahead, thank you, Director Alvarado. The other ones are usually ones that people don't even think about, right? Oh, I've never met a Muslim person like you before. Or I've never, or,
That's horrible.
or yes, or I've seen this one a lot, or you're really pretty for a black girl, or
Right.
oh, you're Latina? I didn't realize that Latinas look like you. Something like that, right? It's a compliment, but we hear it all the time, right?
Right. And the offensiveness is the idea that Latinas are all one way, or that they all look one way. There's also this element, I think, of exotification or objectification, right?
Yes.
It's kind of treating someone as an object of fascination rather than a human. Another common one that I see with LGBTQ people, this is really subtle. You meet someone who's gay and you say, oh my gosh, I have a gay friend I'd love to set you up with. You never do that with straight people, right? You don't meet someone and you find out they're straight and you say, I know a great straight person I think you'd love. You just never do that, because straight people are not defined solely by their identity, but we are defining in that context the LGBTQ person solely by their identity.
Yeah.
Or the other is my friend John. Do you know John? He's gay too.
That's right, because all gay people know
I know
each other.
all the gays.
Well, and before you go, I do want to say that I went through this, I did a training and I teach people these at work, and there's some very small ones that a lot of people don't think of. So I do want everyone to think of these, because most people don't think of these little things. We're having a powwow at work. So I laugh because my husband's family is Native American. We're all First Nation. Half of my family and half of his family, his father grew up on a reservation in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So he's the one who gave us this joke to tell everybody. The next time someone tells you you're having a powwow at work, and say to them, and when you show up in the office, you say, wait a minute, where's the fry bread? Where's the fry bread? You say you're having a powwow. I'm looking for the fry bread in the music. Where is it? So the better word to say you're having a meeting, and most people don't get it. They say things like, too many chiefs and not enough Indians. And
Or
they don't
Mexican
realize,
standoff.
yes, you're having a Mexican standoff instead of a meeting.
Yeah.
Is little things like, they can trigger people. And even though you think, we're circling the wagons, or, hey, I have to go somewhere. Can you hold down the fort? Do you see how these little things sound like they're okay when you say them, but it can trigger someone else? Or, oh, don't go in there because such and such is on the warpath. And all of those are really hard for especially like native tribes, or it's really dry in California. We need to go out and do a rain dance. They're very small things for some people. And I heard this one recently is, I can't do that. I'm the low man on the totem pole.
Or spirit animal is another.
Spirit animal. Yeah, these are good one. So I'm just telling you because it sounds very innocent to a lot of people, and they're so used to saying things that they think that someone else is being sensitive about, because you're so used to saying them. And then a lot of times we may not say anything. We may not say anything. I've had people say, even to my face, they will say something like, there's a picture of me on my social media that shows half of my face covered like this. And some people will say something nice, and some people actually just put on there, you look like a Taliban wife, something like that, because they think it's funny. It's not funny, because there's a negative connotation to Taliban, as most people know, but they think it's funny. So it's just little things. And what I say to someone is this: would you be upset if someone said this about your wife or your daughter, if they made some of these comments about whatever culture you are in? Think of the worst thing that can be said about your culture. And if someone made that kind of joke to you about whatever cultural misgiving, or I forgot the word, is like not slang, but misconception. If someone say that to you, and they didn't say it once or twice, they kept saying it, and they kept saying it, would you be upset? And if the answer is yes, then think about that. Think the words have a lot of power and meaning. So that would be my answer to answer your question, Director Wiener. Then that's how you think about the words. But I thank you, Attorney Martinez. But you want to say something? Go ahead.
Just one last thing to wrap up and kind of bringing us back to Women's History Month. Like I said, it's never the first mistake that results in the lawsuit or the internal complaint, right? It's, a lot of women are taught from a very early age, we're accommodating, we make nice, we learn to smile in response to things, even when we're not in a smiling mood. And so most women are going to give the benefit of the doubt to someone who really does engage in a common microaggression that's gender-based, right? It's when that same microaggression is addressed and repeated that, like I said, we really get to the lawsuit. So someone tells you that something is offensive the first time, do some self-education. You may not agree with them necessarily, but it's something easy to avoid. Don't use the phrase warpath with them anymore. Don't use the phrase lovely girl with them anymore. You don't need to sort of win the debate in the moment about whether something's truly offensive. What I'm trying to help you avoid as your outside counsel is that snowball effect of something that's a mistake repeated multiple times.
Thank you so much. And in the spirit of Women's History Month, I hope you enjoy this time and you celebrate your fabulous self. This was wonderful. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for having me. I will sign off and let you get back to your meeting.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
And with that, I just want to say there's no vote needed because this was just an informational item. We'll just receive this for the file. This item on board decorum and professionalism, we want to talk about this right now. I did ask Attorney Collins to put this on the agenda tonight. It was actually something that, because this is Women's History Month, it is very fitting, but it's actually in response to a couple of things. So this item number 7 is, this discussion tonight is regarding certain of Director Wiener's emails to staff. And Director Wiener did ask that this matter be presented to the board. He originally asked for a special meeting, and I did tell him I would not call a special meeting, but I did tell him we would talk about it today in these meetings. And that I would share his emails with you all for discussion tonight. And they were also included in the board package. So Madam Clerk, would you please at this time share the last email on the screen? The one previous, not this one, the one previous. Previous to this. Not this one, the last one. So I would like to talk about the email, and then when Director Wiener wants to share his graphic from goodboardwork.com, and we can place that one on the screen after we start this initial discussion. But prior to that, I would like to see the email. I want to begin by, do you have that email, Miss Brenda?
Yes, I'm pulling it up right now.
Okay, thank you. So while she's pulling that up, I want to begin the discussion by describing the emails that we're going to discuss tonight. There are 2 emails in which Director Wiener has asked questions of our general manager. And in the email, he misspells her name. Our general manager's name is Miss Lisa Malek Zadeh. And in the email, she responds, and I believe in a very professional way, and she corrects the spelling of her name. And she advised Director Wiener that he had misspelled her name. It happened twice. And following the second time, that general manager advised Director Wiener that he had misspelled her name and asked him to please correct it in the future. And his response was effing spell check, chill. I understand that following this email, that our general counsel spoke to Director Wiener about this and suggested that it would be helpful to acknowledge and apologize for the mistake. I also understand that Director Wiener's position on this is that he typed it correctly and that it is spell check that made the error, that he did nothing wrong and will not apologize. He also maintains that this is a trivial matter. I received a copy of the email indicating this position. Director Wiener asked for this item to be discussed at this board meeting, and therefore I'd like for him to speak next. I think that instead of our 2-minute rule, I think it's appropriate that he have 5 minutes, Vice President Zepeda, to present his concerns, and that each of the directors are also permitted to speak for up to 5 minutes. However, I do not and will not let this discussion go on for more than these 25 minutes. Therefore, if everyone is prepared and ready, Director Wiener, the floor is yours.
Before I begin, I would like to request that I be given more than 5 minutes and that no limit be placed on anybody for this for this item. I sent an email with all of my communication from January 1st to 2/24, which is this last email that you said. And I did so because I wanted to contextualize this discussion.
Okay, that's great, but I'm going to limit it to 5 minutes. We're not
No,
going to.
I'm
do that.
asking my fellow board members.
I know who you're asking. However,
overrule
Director
the
Wiener,
president.
Director Wiener, I am facilitating this meeting. And as I said before, we are not going to be here all night on this meeting. I will give you 5 minutes and I will give each board member who wishes to speak after that 5 minutes. And if the public wants to speak after that, they will be allowed 2 minutes. So you can either argue for your 5 minutes or you can speak for your 5 minutes. It's up to you. But we will limit the time discussion on this item. We are not going to debate this all night. So would you like to speak for 5 minutes or not?
I would like my fellow board members to overrule the
They're
decision of the
not going
president.
to overrule. They're not going to overrule this because it's not up for debates.
I discussed this before with one of my fellow
This is
board
not
members.
up for debates.
You do not
I am
control the debate.
facilitating. Yes, I am. I'm facilitating this meeting. I'm chair of this meeting. So this item.
We have
is part of the
policies,
chair.
Madam Chair. We have
This is
policies,
part of the,
Madam
this is
Chair.
part.
They are
Okay,
very
so we
clear.
are either going to move forward or we can
All right,
skip
I'm going to
your-
begin speaking. I hope.
Thank you. Thank you.
hope
And I
I'm
will
not
cut you off
interrupted.
in 5 minutes. So Vice President Zepeda, would you please start the time? Thank you so much. Your time starts now. Go ahead.
Colleagues, I must say the past half year as director of our district has been disheartening. My ability to play my role as a director has been severely hampered, as well as unfairly criticized. This particular item is on the agenda because I requested an audience of my fellow board members in hopes that you understand what can and will befall you if you express critiques of behavior or policies favored by the board president, the general manager, or district council. Can the meeting administrator please put up the email entitled "Good Board Work, Your Training"?
Madam Clerk, you can please put up the second email that we discussed. Thank you.
This is an example of monthly board training reminder produced by BHI Consulting. It was the principal contributor that trained Director Stanley, Director Alvarado, and I on our first or second week as elected board members. I had been reading these emails for 4 years. I chose this one because it very succinctly shows the important relationships between the public, board members, the board, the general manager, and the district as a whole. Some things to note immediately is that there is no district council illustrated, that the board consists of 5 individuals, that's me on the far left, that the GM is the subordinate of all of the board members, and that the board is not represented as a collective in its relation to the GM. And finally, all board members are equals. Recently, our chair reorganized this style of organization into a 3-legged stool, her words, consisting of the chair, the district council, and general manager. It is this malformation that has led to the pettiness and mischief that has become a serious threat to my ability to govern equally with the rest of the board. The text of the emails the text of this email describes the beauty of the organization picture because it allows for community values and professional opinions to help create good board decisions. The 3-legged stool construct locks out community values and creates professional control. Under the 3-legged stool model, we will hear a lot about professionalism, not as an expression of professional opinion as the board trainer envisioned, but as an expression of professional control. Having been a professional for 30 years, automating San Francisco's largest and most successful corporations, what professionalism means to the huge managerial class that lives within those huge corporations is shut up and do as you're told. I have asked the agenda packet to contain a Word document I created. I know none of you have had a chance to view it. It contains all of the emails I sent directly to the general manager from 1/1 to 2/24 in oldest to newest order, without the text of any replies, just what I said. I would be happy to read the entire file for the record. It will add under 4 minutes to my prepared remarks, but I'm currently prevented from doing so by the board president. But I wish to summarize what's in, regarding names, what's in these emails. The summary of order of salutations. Lisa, 1, Nunn, 1. Ms. Malekzadeh, 2. Miss, M-I-S-S, Malekzadeh, 1. Ms. Malekzadeh, 2. Ms. Malezadeh, 1. Ms. Malekzadeh, 1. Ms. Malezadeh, 1. Ms. Malekzadeh, 1. Summary correctly spelled last name, 7. Incorrectly spelled last name, 2. Other salutations, 2. Microaggressions in emails, 0. The last slide shown by our board president was a reply by the general manager. And in that reply, she said cryptically, well, it's obvious in my style. If you had read the whole thing, it would be obvious my style changed only for the last email. Of course, it had to do with the GM's response to 2 of my previous emails where you can plainly see her name is misspelled. The topic of the emails in question were not out of the ordinary otherwise. After the first misspelling, the general manager replied appropriately to the email and added a notice that I had misspelled her name. Now, the record shows that the first misspelling was followed by an email with correct spelling of last name, and then followed by a second email misspelling. I was surprised because of the GM's concern. I had paid attention to my typing of her name in salutation. I thought it strange that I would fat finger her name again. So I typing even more closely. So I watched my typing even more closely. It was then that I discovered that on my new district phone, the default was to replace words with spell check. I noticed that the change from the name Malik to the word males occurred after I typed the hyphen. The GM's reply to the second misspelling prompted my final email, whose 3 words have caused so much fake controversy and time wasting.
Director Wiener,
Yes.
give us 1 second. So the time is up. President Sedith, would we be able to hear him? Are you almost done?
Yes, I have 2 more paragraphs.
How long are these paragraphs?
From about here.
No, not, I'm not reading the whole page. So I give you one.
Not
more
a whole
sentence
page.
to be done.
Ma'am,
No, I'm gonna get, I give you
not a whole page.
I give you the ability to finish that paragraph that you're reading. That's it.
It's only 1 paragraph, but it's about 2
Finish that paragraph.
paragraphs.
Finish that paragraph. Go ahead.
The GM, and again, I would appreciate if you could spell my last name correctly, adding cryptically. If you intend to use it to address me in this way. I took that to mean my using the standard business salutation, Mr. This or Mr. That, had some nefarious intention in her mind. So my reply to this was to explain effing spell check was the culprit, and I had no malintent behind referring to her as Miss Malekzadeh, so chill. I look forward to our chair's explanation why the 3 words effing spell check and chill, 3 out of 403 words presented, 3 words presented completely out of context, rise to any level of concern and are, I quote, disrespectable, unacceptable, and a violation of our policy. Don't forget, colleagues, you too are subject to the same arbitrary standards of professionalism and the same arbitrary interpretation of policy, regardless of the fact that you govern the district, you have been granted authority over the GM's performance by your election, and finally, a majority will replace a general manager simply because they cannot work with that person. These are your powers, and I ask you to protect them and me from the 3-legged stool. And I'm done.
Thank you. Other directors who would like to speak? Director Stanley and then Director Alvarado. Go ahead, Director Stanley. You have your directors available. Please start the time. We're getting incredible reverb.
Yes.
Are you on a phone and a computer?
I'm aware of this. The reason why I have to do this is because I can't hear the meeting unless I have my face plugged up to my speakers, which is why I've requested that my phone and my laptop be replaced per Claire computer, and I haven't yet received a response. So I'm doing this funky little thing so you can see me and I can hear you. In response to Director Wiener's request, I too am alarmed at the non-understanding of how a government agency works and elected officials work, and the power play that's going on at the district. I am also concerned about our inability to actually debate anything on behalf of the public that elected us, and it concerns me a great deal. And I think there's a whole lot of unfortunate things that are going on within the district. As far as Director Wiener goes, I don't understand why what he wrote in the email that's being shown is any different than the our general manager's emails that always had a tagline at the end of them before we switched software that said, please disregard any spell checking errors or whatever before, and as sort of a preemptive apology. And I am constantly frustrated with spell checker because it always does that change just as or right before you do the send, and it's not like you can grab it back, and it's perplexing to me. So I personally don't see what the issue is. Thank you. Bye.
Director Alvarado.
Is Director Stanley done?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. First, let me say, what I'm hearing tonight is kind of sad, because really this all could have been squashed just by Director Wiener apologizing to the general manager. And I think that would have went a long way toward kind of fixing things between the board and the GM. And I also think that we just need to be kind to one another. We need to be respectful. We need to be courteous. And, you know, no individual wants to be disrespected. No individual. And I've also got something written that I've got down that I really want to say to everybody. And it starts like this. Elected officials collectively decide policy issues for the agency. Staff is responsible for implementing that policy direction. In most local agencies, the governing body appoints a top staff person. In this case, our general manager. This person is responsible for implementing the governing body's policy directives and agency laws. We are one of 5 board members. We have a president and vice president who are the parliamentarians in our meetings. And if we didn't have that, we'd have chaos. So we need to respect the people that we elected to lead this body. Our president is responsible for implementing the governing body's directives and agency laws. And the general manager is responsible for overseeing the administrative operation of the agency. And without that, we'd have chaos. That's why we have these things in place. Having an administrative professional to oversee the agency's day-to-day operations enables elected officials like the board to focus on big policy issues for the agency without the distraction of administrative tasks like managing personnel and preparing and implementing budgets. That's not what we do. That's why we hire a general manager. It also enables us to hold one person accountable for the agency's administration. We have one employee, the general manager. We, as the board, should not get involved in administrative day-to-day operations. That's not what we are elected for. We also have top staff members who have the authority and the responsibility to resolve interdepartmental disputes with the supervision of the general manager. Public agency staff often are members and participate in professional organizations to keep them current on management and important issues. These organizations are a valuable source of continuing education, professional development, and connections with fellow public special districts. It is our responsibility as local officials to support our general manager and be cognizant of our responsibilities. We, as elected officials, must know our roles and support the person we selected to lead the agency, which we did unanimously. To not do this is a dereliction of our role that the ratepayers elected us to do. And this is not a good thing. We all must treat staff with respect and courtesy. So please join me in condemning such behavior that is not in line with this. I, for one, support the general manager and our staff 100%. And I thank them for their efforts. And I thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Alvarado. Vice President Zepeda. I know you're having a hard time today.
I am coughing too much to be able to try to speak, sorry.
Okay. First of all, let me correct something really quick before I say anything else. I think there's a confusion here in what I say, so I want to make sure that they both Director Weiner and Director Stanley are crystal clear in what I say. Your concept of what I said the three-legged stool is, I said this how we will work with partnership with the general manager and the general counsel. That is what I said, and that is what I meant. That this board will work in partnership with the general counsel and the general manager. I went to the board works training. And that model that you showed is their interpretation of what, and is one interpretation out of many of what a board can and should look like in their view, but it is not the only one. When I look at, and for any of you who've ever been to the Institute for Local Government, and if you've ever looked at any thing that they've put out, this month March is procurement month. It's also ethics month. And it's often said that ethics is the foundation of public service. And it is essential for public trust and confidence in public officials that we have ethics, that we have integrity, that we're trustworthy. You can't teach that. You either have it or you don't. But even though this is true, ethics alone is just not enough. Because people don't trust government. They don't trust. And the current dearth of public confidence in government officials means that we have to work even harder for people to trust us, to people to believe in us, to people to look to us. We have to lead by example, even more so than we did in the past. So to say that we don't have to be professional, we don't have to be leaders in the sense that we have to speak a certain way or act a certain way. That we don't have to have the highest levels of civility and decorum. Is to say that we are here to underscore the most negative stereotypes of government leaders. That we don't have to modulate our own behavior. We don't have to have a certain level of, and I'm going to use a word that some of us like throwing around but don't know the meaning, of equanimity. When engaging with one another and when engaging with the staff, especially our general manager and our general counsel. To say that we don't have to have that, to say that it's okay to have a lack of civility, so much so that it impedes our ability to govern, to start off every meeting with a level of disrespect for the chair, and yes, I mean me, because you don't like the fact that one is no longer sitting in that chair, to try to stall a decision-making process or undermine the process, to fuel political apathy and discourage participation until one has their own way, to use one's own egotistical view of how things should work. So I want to tell you that I actually believe Director Weiner when he said he did not intend to misspell the GM's name. I actually believe him. I actually believe you. You can make all the faces you want to. I'm just telling you, I actually believe you. Because mistakes can happen. It happens to all of us. It happens to all of us. However, the response in saying effing spell check and chill was dismissive, it was unprofessional, and it was rude. And to follow that up with a refusal to take responsibility for the tone of that last email, and to continue to do that today, even after the training that we all just went through, is problematic. And that is what is considered a microaggression. That is not even an unconscious bias, it is a conscious bias.
to continue to argue that one has done nothing wrong, even after having that outstanding training, which gave you the foundation for bad behavior, even when one is told that when you do something of this nature, that the resolution after microaggressive incidents is to, the most important part about that everybody does it, but to acknowledge the negative feelings that someone has, to own up to the responsibility, to drop the defensiveness and the dismissiveness, to listen and be open to education, to engage in self-reflection and do some regular gut checks. And chiefly, do not repeat the same mistake twice. But what I heard from Director Wiener and Director Stanley was that there was no problem. It is one thing to make a mistake, but it is another to be dismissive and rude and professional and then say, I will not apologize and I don't think I did anything wrong. It is another for us to continue to conduct ethics trainings, but we also must take time to discuss how we will govern. I did that the first day when we met as in my term as president, and I told you then that we will have a year where we will focus not just on being sitting here as public officials, but we will be people who will act with integrity. We will listen with curiosity, we will speak with honesty, and we will act with integrity. And we will do so in a forum that upholds our code of conduct. We will do so with the utmost of decorum, and we will be ethical and professional. And if that means I have to hit that mute button until you only get 2 minutes, then that's what you will get. You will respect the fact that I am the chair of this meeting. You don't have to like it, but you will respect that. And you will respect the fact that we will respect our staff. We will respect our general manager. We will respect our general counsel. We don't all have to agree, but we will respect one another. You can, when we turn off these cameras and we are at home, we can talk, you can talk whatever you want to talk. But as long as we are on these cameras, and as long as we are in this public eye, we will respect one another. We will not have this kind of vitriol. I hope that that is clear. This is not a power trip. This is a partnership, and it's the only way we can get work done. So the three-legged stool stands. That is the way we will conduct business. We will conduct business where we all work in partnership. This board, the GM, and the GC, regardless of anything that you put up on a screen. I'm not about a power trip. We are not better than one another. So I hope I made myself clear that I don't care about these little drawing that you put together. The only one who is in control of any of us is the public that we serve. And that's who we should be competing to be better than. We all should be working in partnership to serve the public better, not to have a bigger ego. Moving on to the next order of business, unless Vice President Zepeda, you have anything to say. I know you're not feeling well tonight, but thank you so much. Unless we have comments from the public, Ms. Brenda.
If we have any comments from the public, if they can please raise their hand. Madam President, we have no comments, seeing no hands raised.
Thank you so much. We will move on. Justin, would you like to start with other business, please?
Yes, Madam President, we have 4 reports. The first 2 are the COVID update and the check register and quarterly investment report are part of the agenda packet. I do have a reminder for the board that the Form 700 filing deadline is April 1st, and you can work with our clerk Brenda Martinez if you have any challenges accessing the website, if you have not already done so.
Just one
So,
moment.
yes.
Just one moment. Board directors, have each of you received the notice? And do you have any issues with your Form 700s? Yes, yes, yes. You have not received yours, Director Wiener? You have? Okay, Director Stanley, yes? Director Alvarado, yes?
Can you repeat that, please? I'm sorry.
Have you received the notice for your Form 700 and are you able to access? Yes?
Yes, I have. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Appreciate that.
okay. All right, good. All right. Okay. Sir Justin, you continue,
Sure.
please.
Yeah, so I'll stop there is if there's any questions on the items for the report, and then I will hand it over to Department Manager Aaron Weiner to give us an update on one of our grants that we've applied for.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Justin. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Good evening, Board President Sudduth, the directors and staff. To those couple of you who aren't feeling well tonight, I hope you have a speedy recovery because it's not a good thing to not feel well. So on a little bit of good news, wanted to share with you this evening. In late fourth quarter of last year, California Office of Emergency Services came out with a program, the 2020 Community Power Resiliency Allocation to Special Districts Program. You may recall that Andrew Cloud, the Deputy GM, came to you on the 18th of November and requested permission to sign for the grant, and we went forward and filled out an application. And on Friday, we received notice that we were awarded the $300,000 that we applied for. So we're going to move forward with putting together a plan for purchasing generators, fuel and storage components, emergency backup communications equipment, and also do some contingency planning and continuity planning. So those were the things that we outlined in our application packet and we're eligible to do with the funds. I did want to, thank staff because a lot of energy went into that application. We had a real quick turnaround, about a 2-week turnaround. We had a real good, solid coordinating effort with staff, and also Carollo Engineers, one of our consultants, helped us a lot with the application process. So we've got a lot of work to do. We have to respond in the next week or two and accept the award. And then we have about 3 months to put together a firm plan to use the funds. And then we have 4 months to execute. So it's really good news that we got this award. And now we got some work to do to put it to good use and make it happen. So that's what I wanted to let you know tonight. And we'll take any questions if you have any.
That is great news. Congratulations. Great job. Board directors, do we have any questions or comments for the staff?
None here. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Director Stanley?
Yes. Hang on. I have to do this 2-step. Aaron, thanks. Well done, dude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Stanley.
Dr. Wiener, Vice President Zepeda?
May I speak?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, great job. Great job. We're on a roll. We're on a roll. It's good stuff.
Thank you. And I know the Director Zepeda or Vice President Zepeda is not feeling well. So, okay. Do we have more reports? Sir Justin?
That concludes our reports, unless our Attorney Collins has any information for the report for the board. That is all from the staff side.
Okay, thank you. Attorney Collins, you're up. Oh, we
You're
can't hear you.
muted. And
We can't hear you
we
with
missed
your
it.
headphones.
I'm sorry. It's embarrassing. I apologize. I was just going to remind you all about your Form 700s. And please remember that if you are a member of the WCA, you also report for the WCA. But recently, I just want to, if I may, just give a shout out to Brenda Martinez, our district clerk. We had to go through and reform several years of records in the Form 700 files with the county clerk, and she just did a really great job of cleaning all that up. If you guys got some funny emails from a woman named Lauren Hull, she is the facilitator for your Form 700 filing. And so please, if you get an email from Lauren Hull, make sure you pay attention to it because it is about your Form 700 filing status. And again, I just want to compliment Brenda Martinez on her hard work on getting that all cleaned up. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, Director Alvarado.
I just want to thank Brenda as well for cleaning that up and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brenda. I know there was a lot. Thank you to both of you, Madam Secretary, Madam Clerk, and Attorney Collins. Thank you so much. Sir Justin?
Yes, Madam President, item 9 is the director's comments and meeting reports.
Oh, thank you so much. So, directors, let's start with Director Alvarado.
Okay, so I attended the March 1st San Pablo City Council. Nothing really pertinent to the West County wastewater. The North Richmond MAC was canceled on the 2nd. Then I went to the mayor's conference on the 4th, and not really anything to report there. Let's see, San Pablo City Council on Monday, and that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Director Stanley? Director Stanley?
I've got nothing.
Thank you. Director Weiner?
Let's see. Okay. I attended the mayor's conference. The majority of topics revolved around the environment. They talked about the nexus between fire and water, fuel concerns, increased grazing, optimistic on California's water future. Community emission reduction plan is in the works. Toll booth decommissioning to be permanent on all bridges. And Glazer has introduced a bill to extend eviction protections and rent forgiveness. I attended the official signing of the second MOU between the state of California and the nation of Denmark. The ambassador of Denmark and lieutenant governor were in attendance, along with many other state and national representatives with environmental and business portfolios. The state has become an international player. CASA had a representative who spoke about our issues. The biggest joint project completed resulting from the first MOU was a mapping of the substrate of the state down to 30 meters to better determine groundwater location and amounts. I also attended a wastewater workshop about Danish advancements in wastewater. I gave a more complete report to the IO&E committee, which followed. I attended the El Sobrante MAC, whose main topic was the county master plan with emphasis on El Sobrante. On the 8th and the 11th, I met with Director Stanley and was able to help her access the district's email server through the web and on all of her devices and set her district phone up to connect to Zoom, the results of which were apparently only partially successful. That is my report.
Thank you so much. Vice President Veda, yes or no?
So I'm going to try to speak. I don't have much to report. I attended the Richmond City Council meetings, but nothing to report there. But I wanted to see if we can, as a governing body, be able to acknowledge and maybe put something out to the community, acknowledging and speaking out against Asian American hate that's been going on. If we can issue a statement on behalf of the board and the agency, I would appreciate it. As many might know, a couple of days ago, I think it was yesterday or the day before, there was a murder of 8 individuals in Atlanta or in Georgia because of their race. Right? And there's a lot of hate going on, and that particular community is being targeted a lot more than any other community right now, especially around COVID. So it would be great if we can stand in solidarity as a board and be able to issue a statement. That again, that's not a report, but that is more of a request for the board. If I can make that into a motion, and if I can get a second, if we can get someone to be able to issue that out.
Sure, I will second it. And we can vote on it in just a minute. Can we vote on it after I speak? I actually attended a press conference on the same thing in Walnut Creek a couple of days ago, and it was actually countywide, speaking against hate, but specifically API communities. So we have a sample, and a bunch of local organizations signed the press release. So we have a sample press release, but I think it's a good idea for the district to put out something in that regard. So with that said, we have a in the proper second in Attorney Collins.
I just thought I could make a recommendation that you adjourn the meeting in honor and remembrance of the people who were murdered in that incident, and reaffirming the district's commitment to equality or something along those lines. That's a way that you could end this meeting, and that could then be, if you so desire, publicized on our social media.
Okay.
That's really something for the general manager, but I just wanted to say that adjourning in honor of them would be one way to do it.
Okay. So we'll can we make a note of that and then come back to it? Because I do want to say something else, but I want to make sure that Vice President Zabita is finished first. Are you finished? Okay. A couple of things before we get to our favorite part of the meeting. So I did attend the Sisters in Solidarity event it was on the 6th, and also Equity in Action, the Bay Area Urban League. And the press conference was mainly held because of the killing of Angelo Quinto in Antioch. So along with the recommendation that Attorney Collins just made, I would like to add Angelo's name to that recommendation. Angelo was also of Asian heritage. So, and that's he was killed in police custody. And so we've been working with his mom. The Racial Justice Coalition has been working with his mom on this case. I've been attending the Women's Commission meetings because this is March is Women's History Month. And so we've had a lot of events going on. One of the most exciting things I've been doing this month is working with the California Black Women's Collective. And we've been having meetings with Governor Newsom and with Dianne Feinstein's office. For some of you who don't know, she is considering ending her term early, especially if her husband gets an appointment as an ambassador. So we've been working on what that will look like in governance. And he has committed to appointing a Black woman to the Senate seat. Why is that important to our wastewater district? Because Dianne Feinstein, for many of you who don't know, she has been a staunch environmental ally for those of us who are environmentalists. And so I meet with her office every other month. And my role in those meetings has been talking about environmental meetings. So I'm particularly interested in infrastructure and environmental, and that has been my role in upholding any environmental or infrastructure bills. And we actually have a meeting with her office next week to talk about the huge infrastructure bill that has been stalled since last year. So keep posted, especially on the national bill on flushable wipes. It's a big one that I really want to know about. Other than that, I want to get to our favorite part. So Miss Brenda, do you have what we're going to adjourn in honor of?
Yes, I do. Do you want me to take roll on the motion first?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. We'll start with Director Alvarado.
Yes.
Director Stanley.
Yes.
Director Weiner.
Yes.
Vice President Cepeda.
Yes.
Thank you. And President Sedith.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes by a vote of 5-0.
Yes. Thank you. And then we will, so if there are no more reports, we will adjourn the meeting. And can you read while we are adjourning the meeting, how we were adjourning the meeting, Ms. Brenda?
In honor and remembrance of the 8 individuals that were killed in Atlanta. And is it Angelo Loquito?
It's Quinto, Angelo Quinto.
Okay, and adjourning in his memory as well. And I don't know if we want to keep this part, but reaffirming the district's commitment to equality and have something published on our social media as well.
Yeah, so let me just add this in the district affirming its commitment to justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, access, and equality. Do we have it? Everybody agree? Good?
Thank you.
We are good. It is 9 o'clock straight up. Have a good evening.
You as well. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Good night.